Hello, lovely people. So today we're going to be trying a couple of different things. First of all, we're making a baking video, which I've never actually done on my channel before, even though I bake a lot. And secondly, I'm actually doing some dual angle action. So I've got this camera, it's an iPad, and then I've got my phone camera recording what I'll be baking, and then hopefully we'll be able to splice these angles together. I've never tried this before, so I'm not sure how this will go, so be patient, but I think it will go well. Now, why are we baking? Baking is something I find very calming and also very helpful, and something I've kind of learned is a lot of people get very intimidated by baking, which is weird because I get intimidated by cooking, but anyway. So I thought we'd start with something really simple, which is bread, and a lot of people seem to think that bread is like one of those things that you can't bake. It can only be done by like master bakers, but that is definitely not the case. Bread is very easy to make with or without yeast. We're going to be doing a recipe without yeast, which is even easier, but if you find a recipe that requires yeast, it just takes a little bit longer. It's still great. So I'll link the recipe that we're using below, and I've got it copied out here so I know what I'm doing, and we'll just get right into it. So the first thing we need to do is preheat our oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, which I will do now. Quite hot, but you know, that's how baking goes. And literally this recipe is just kind of dump everything into a bowl, then knead, and you're good to go. So we'll be okay. Alright, so the first thing you're going to need to know is that this requires lukewarm water. So what I would do is fill your water up first, and then just wait, like let it sit while you put the rest of the ingredients in, so by the time it's ready, you have water that's a little bit closer to room temperature. So this requires 3/4 cup of water, so got my little measuring cup here. And then the first thing we need is 2 cups of flour. So I always use a knife when I'm working with flour just to level it off so it's exact, or the back of a fork, whatever you can find really. So we'll start with that. Got my little cup. I keep my flour and sugar in these containers. They're probably from Target or something. They're just easy to work with, easier than trying to get into a bag of flour, you know. And I always make a mess with flour, so there's going to be some cleanup. This recipe will definitely require some cleanup at the end since you'll be kneading, but it shouldn't be that bad. Flour comes off fairly easily. I scoop my cup full of flour and then I just kind of level it off with the back of whatever utensil I'm using. Right now it's a fork. So we just dump that in and then we do it again. It's always a good idea to clean as you go, so like move your ingredients off from where you're working once you're done with them, just so that your space doesn't get too cluttered and you're not completely overwhelmed by the time you're ready. This recipe will require more flour when we knead, so I will be putting that off into a corner, but still in the general working space. I have also somehow managed to already get flour on my paper recipe, which is kind of impressive, but I will just dump that because we're going to be using flour anyway later. So the next thing we need is 1/2 teaspoon of sugar and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So we'll just go into our little cabinet up here. This really only has like 5 ingredients. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5, counting the water, which is quite good. Okay, so next we're going to add in the sugar, salt, and baking powder. So we need 1/2 teaspoon of sugar and 1/2 teaspoon of salt, which is easy enough. We'll just get that from over here. Make that nice and even. With something as small as these, I don't really use a knife. I just sort of tap it to make sure that we get essentially what we want. And then finally, we need 2 teaspoons of baking powder, which will be 4 for me because I cannot find my teaspoon right now. So we'll use 4 of the 1/2 scoops. This is called improvising. It's also basic math, so, you know, it's not the most inventive. It's not like I came up with this. This is pretty low on baking powder, but I think we should be able to get it out. Otherwise, I will just break out my new container. Okay. I think we're just gonna have to start pouring it and hope for the best. Come on, you can do it. Alright, that's about 2 teaspoons. Hopefully this will not be a terrible mistake that I will later regret. We'll see. Now the recipe recommends whisking these ingredients together, so I'm just going to use my little whisk from my hand mixer and just quickly, get those in. There's really not a huge amount of whisking you need to do. You just want the ingredients to be combined before you start mixing in the water, which is what we're going to do now. So we'll just put this over here. I don't actually need this right now. So now we're going to mix in the water slowly. Actually, I think you can just pour it all in, and then you just want to mix this with a fork until it becomes kind of doughy, which hopefully we will see from my handy dandy camera setup. So, since we're not using any type of mixer, actually there's no need to go super slow because the flour won't explode like it would if you were using any type of hand mixer or electric mixer. So we can just use our, arm power. So as you can see, the dough is already becoming more doughy. You can kind of see the lumps of dough that are forming. As it gets into more of a doughy state, I'm going to eventually just get in there with my hands to make sure it's all properly combined into, one doughy shape. So we're going to do that now. It's important to remember when you're working with any type of dough to always, always, always flour your hands, because you do not want the dough sticking to your hands. So just get some flour, put them on, and then we're just going to take this off. As you can see, it's already sticking a little bit, but I think the hand should be floury enough that we can just get it to combine. This isn't quite the kneading process yet. I am sort of kneading it, but really I'm just combining to make sure we can get all of the dough chunks into one dough chunk, basically. And the thing about dough, bread dough especially, is you can always adjust the recipe as you go along. So if your bread dough is looking too dry, which mine kind of is, you might want to add a little bit more water. So I'm just going to add, I think, a tablespoon more water. So we'll just pop that in the drier parts, and then we'll mix that up with a fork again so they really start getting wet, and then just try to stick it into our big mass of dough. Pretty easy, right? Okay, now the dough is really sticky, which is kind of what I wanted. And it's really starting to combine, so we've got a nice hunk of dough here. My hands are a little messy, so I think I'm going to flour them some more before I really get going. Alright, so now when you're kneading, you're going to want to flour whatever surface you're working on. So we're just going to put some flour all over here, and then put some more on my hands, using the container just to catch any excess flour that will fall, because I don't want to have to vacuum my floor, but I probably will anyway, and then we'll just move that out of the way. I believe the recipe said you should knead for about 5 minutes. I would just do it until the dough looks like stereotypical bread dough, so very elastic. I will show you, I believe, yes, okay, you can see it on my other camera. So for kneading, you really just want to push in with your arms and elbows. Now, as someone with EDS, this is going to hurt for me. I'm not going to lie, it's not going to feel good, and I will probably pay for it, but I will have bread, so worth it. So you really just want to push in. And once you start kneading, it should start looking more like this, like a really fully formed dough. As always, if it starts getting too dry, because it's absorbing some of the flour from your floury surface, feel free to add more water, and if it's too wet, add more flour. But ideally, it should just start to become this nice, springy dough. Now luckily, since we're not using yeast, we don't have to have any rising time. Normally when you make bread with yeast, there's what we call proving and then rising time, so you would cover it in a warm place for like an hour, 2 hours, then knead it some more, then do the same thing again. But we have no yeast, so our bread doesn't need that rising time, which is really nice, especially if you're like me and always get the urge to bake at like midnight when you really don't have time for 3 hours of rising. So we're just gonna keep, I'll probably do this for about 2 more minutes, kneading this into a nice loaf shape. Now, the recipe that I am using says you can put it on a baking sheet. I'm going to be using a bread pan just because I have a bread pan, but you can really use anything that can go in the oven to make your bread. Just needs to be a container of some sort. I just like using the bread pan because it's easier to mold it into a loaf shape. but then there's no like loaf shape you have to follow. It'll still bake fine if you make it in like kind of a roll shape or a more traditional bread loaf. This actually looks a bit small. I think it's only going to make 1 loaf instead of 2, which is what the recipes I usually use make, which is fine. I don't actually need 2 bread loaves right now. And for the purposes of our demonstration, it will work well. But if you don't like this recipe, all you have to do is Google easy bread recipe online, and tons of recipes will come up. I don't know why it's such like an open secret that everyone thinks bread is impossible to make. It's really not. It just takes a little elbow grease and getting over like the intimidation. Because, I mean, why do you think bread's such a big part of our diet? Because it's so easy to make. And I know it seems like one of those things you can only buy at the supermarket, but really it's not. So I think we're gonna give this about 1 more minute. It's already getting quite stretchy. Again, there's no like window pane test or anything we need to do because we aren't using yeast. So it's really just kneading until you feel that it's right. And if you've never made bread before, just follow how long the recipe says. As I said, I've made bread before, so I kind of have an idea of what I'm working with here. But if you feel a little less confident, that's completely fine as well. You will be totally able to make it on your own. All right, I think that's good. So bread dough looks like this. It's a little bit stretchy, a little bit puffy. So what we're gonna do now is take our bread pan, which is definitely too big for this, but I'm gonna use it anyway. And I am just gonna put some nonstick cooking spray on it. You can also use flour or butter. I just like using the cooking spray because it's easy. Then we're going to take our little bread dough friend here, and we're gonna try and form him into a little loaf to the best of my abilities. Oh gosh, this really is gonna be small. I was hoping I could do this to put off going to the supermarket, but it looks like I might not. Obviously bread expands, but yeah, we'll see how big this gets. I don't know. So according to the recipe, you bake for 15 minutes at 425 degrees, then bring your oven down to 350 and then bake for 10 more minutes. Then there's a cooling period and then you're good to go. So this is our little bread friend. We are gonna put him in the oven now. I actually just made banana bread, and I'm curious if you would be interested in seeing how that is made. It's my mom's recipe. It's delicious. It's really more like making a cake than making bread. There's no kneading time or anything like that. But it's so easy to make and so fun. Ooh, that's hot. Okay. So I'm just gonna set a timer for 15 minutes, and then we are just gonna clean up our space in the meantime. Because there's no more kneading necessary, we can wipe everything down. And I will come back to you after the bread comes out of its full bake, so in about a half an hour. We are now back. Our bread has been cooked and prepared, which means it's now the best time, which is the eating time. So because it was so small, I can just take it out. It's very white, but it smells like bread. I checked it with a toothpick and it's not doughy, so I guess it just comes out kind of white. I didn't feel like putting it back into brown. So now we're gonna have to taste test, which means I'm gonna make a sandwich. It's quite useful, actually, because I haven't had lunch. And now I can check things off my to-do list while still getting lunch. I have a serrated bread knife, which I would recommend using, but it's dirty right now, so we're just gonna use a butter knife and hope for the best. And if we have to rip, we have to rip. All right, we got 1 slice. 2 slices. We are go. So, as you can see here, the bread is pretty doughy on the inside and still a bit hot, but it's bread. I was a little worried because I hadn't used this recipe before. It's not super risen, but let's see how it tastes. Don't taste good. Is it the prettiest loaf of bread? No. Will it work? Yes. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed me showing you that baking bread is actually not so difficult, and I would love to see what you come up with if you decide to make some yourself. So I hope you're having a great weekend, and I will see you next week. Bye.